can still see me, right? Yeah.
Just alpha order.
You sink down, huh?
Laura, do you want us to have these on the panel? Let me ask her what the policy is. Most of you see people not on the policy.
Yeah, you kind of just kind of bring it back in.
I'm with you. There we go. Your microphone.
I got one here.
I'm going to share with you
Okay.
as the moderator since I'm not speaking.
Well, I get my own. Well, that makes sense.
Share and share like
Your organization? I'm not We should do tons of work together, for goodness sakes. Yeah, you do. Absolutely.
Lots of talk to you. Although there's actually one project that we're, yes, it is the customer's bottleneck, but we're maybe about halfway through one project with you guys.
Oh, really?
Yeah,
And
no.
is it a
It's an energy
government,
efficiency
private,
upgrade.
private sector?
It's actually fingers crossed that gets done. That would be if
In the U.S., is it?
in the U.S. Yeah. We've done some work with them before, and I think you guys have as well.
Okay, so I think we're 5
Oh.
So, hello? Yeah, it's good. Green light. Welcome, everybody. We're so pleased to be here at the America's All-In U.S. Climate Action Center. Good evening, good afternoon, good morning. My name is Laura Tierney. I'm the Director of International Programs at the Business Council for Sustainable Energy. Today's event is called More Bang for the Buck, Investing in Mitigation and Resilience Together. This is a theme that the Business Council has been hosting dialogues on with its members for the past several months on the road to COP, as we're finding that this is really very topical and a keen way to make investments and advocate for policies that expand markets for clean energy deployment. So, to our host, thank you again at the U.S. Climate Action Center. It's played a critical role as a hub and a home for businesses, states, cities, institutions, the fabric of American culture on climate action in the United States. And we're so thankful that it's here now this year in conjunction with the whole of government approach and the national government as well. So our main message here at COP for the Business Council for Sustainable Energy is that we do not need to wait to make significant emissions reductions. We can achieve greater global ambition with existing clean energy and energy efficiency solutions. It is time to focus on implementation. That's something we're hearing over and over again at this year's COP, and to make investments at scale in our economies, infrastructure, and communities to reduce emissions, create new jobs, and strengthen resilience. So allow me to introduce this panel briefly. I'm going to read the names and ask our panelists just to kind of wave going down the line, and then we're going to open up and dive right into discussion. So to my left, I have Bob Hinkle, President and CEO of Mattress Energy. To his left, Kathleen McGinty, Vice President and Chief Sustainability Government and Regulatory Affairs Officer at Johnson Controls. It's a very good title. Rebecca Toleen, Vice President and Chief Sustainability Officer at Tennessee Valley Authority. And Scott Tu, Vice President, these long titles, Vice President of Sustainability and Managing Director, Center for Energy Efficiency and Sustainability at Trane Technologies. Yeah, his edges out Katie's just by a little bit. So enough of this. Let's start with the panel discussion. I'm going to go to Bob first, just to introduce yourself. Tell us a little bit about how your company fits into the theme of today's panel, maximizing the benefits of both mitigation and resilience investments. And tell us about your company. So, Bob.
Well, thanks to BCSC for having me here on this panel, and happy to be here and excited. Bob Hinkle, President and CEO of Mattress Energy, and I've been working in the energy efficiency space for over 20 years. I founded Mattress back in 2009 because I believed that energy efficiency was a critical but highly undervalued resource that, if properly harnessed, could help implement a wide range of climate positive investments and solutions. And each project that we do at Mattress improves the resiliency of the built environment, and it mitigates GHG emissions. Our typical project is an integrated multi-measure retrofit that bundles in a wide range of technologies that upgrades critical infrastructure and equipment and facilities, so to the resiliency theme, but is also achieving comprehensive energy savings. Mattress is a developer, financer, and an owner of larger scale energy efficiency and renewable energy projects. And to do that, we partner with a wide range of businesses, schools, hospitals, local governments, really in every sector and in every region across the US we're involved. And how we're financing projects is through a pay-for-performance project finance solution where we're delivering sustainable energy as a service, which by design is improving the resiliency of buildings and mitigating GHG emissions. So how it works for Mattress is under our Sustainable Energy Services Agreement, or SESA, we fund 100% of the upfront cost of a project. We do that partially with our own equity, but also with outside debt. And then once a project's operational, we begin to measure the realized energy savings or renewable energy generation, and that forms the basis of service charges that customers pay to Mattress. Initially, we were heavily focused on energy efficiency and still are, but a little bit to the themes of this panel over the last couple of years, we've expanded and recently have adjusted our SESA so that alongside energy efficiency, we can also finance solar, energy storage, and EV charging. And I think that the SESA really helps tackle two main objectives. First, helping customers speed the implementation of what they do. So with customers starting to think of science-based targets and 2030 dates, we can help them get there quicker. And then we can also deepen the scope because we're able to bundle together different technologies. At the site level, we do it by bundling together different energy efficiency technologies, but also alongside solar and storage and EV charging, but also increasingly at the portfolio level, where we'll work with a single company that owns multiple sites and then have them bundle those sites together in a single financing, even though they're thousands of miles apart. So all that together helps get more done. And Laura mentioned America's All In, and for Mattress, that's really core to our mission. We've been part of America's All In since it was, we are still in, so we're very proud about that. And really, I think reflecting the moment and certainly where we are today, I want to announce that under America's All In, we're going to be upping our commitment to $200 million of investment of sustainable energy. So we look forward to getting after that, helping that happen quickly, and moving onward from that. So thank you.
On to me.
Yeah.
Well, hi everybody again. I'm Katie McGinty, and I don't want to date myself, but I will say at the top that I have been coming and participating in climate negotiations now in things that measure in decades, 3 of them. And I do want to say that, one, I believe already this COP is a success. Second, that the real and substantive agreements that have been made here in critical sectors are force multipliers for change. And third, I think with and around America's All In, to see the global financial community all in, I think has the promise to say this will be a turning point in terms of real and meaningful climate action. At least that's our story. We're sticking to it. We're driving it forward. I think that this question about resilience and mitigation, it is really interesting because in some ways, the way the dialogue has unfolded in those 30 years, it's kind of an either or. We either tackle it up front or we're going to be adapting to it down the road. But I think in many ways, it's actually you have to have both or you're going to have neither. And in our world at Johnson Controls, there's a really specific thing that brings that together for me, and it's about another buzzword, which is digitalization. Some of you might say digitization, but I'm sticking to my digitalization. And here's the reason. So we live in and around, we are a pure play, sustainable buildings technology company. Now here's the unsustainable story. Buildings represent 40% of global greenhouse gas emissions. Most of the buildings around today are going to still be here in 2050, and only 1% of them a year is getting upgraded. That's not a good story. But here's what we know. One, to decarbonize the climate, you decarbonize those buildings. Two, to decarbonize them, you electrify them. And back to my buzzword, you digitalize them. Right, so to get to that resilience, that mitigation piece, dialing down the emissions with the electrification, with efficient equipment, you're 30–40% dialing those emissions down. Good start. If we're really about net zero, we're never going to get there with siloed pieces of efficient equipment. You got to bust through the silos, and that is where the digital platform comes in, number one. As Rebecca will teach us in terms of an electricity expert, then that building needs to talk to the grid. You put that together and you can get to not only net zero, but net energy positive buildings. It has to be digitalized to achieve those metrics. So that's the mitigation piece. You know, Laura, we're starting to get to genuinely net zero in those buildings. That's 40% of the climate equation. But what about that resilience piece? See, I think that's about digital too, and you're not going to get it unless you got the digital for mitigation. And here's kind of the reason. So COVID taught us a lot. One of the things it taught us is that if resilience is about agility and flexibility, buildings are the opposite. They are analog and inert. The stats during COVID, 80% reduction in the number of people in a lot of buildings, especially commercial office buildings. We barely hit 10% reduction in the use of energy in those buildings. Not agile, not flexible. We gotta shake that up, and we have to shake it up in terms of making those buildings smart, sustainable, and then in terms of resilience, it's things like an agile building today is pulling in fresh air as much as possible to ensure a healthy space. Tomorrow, sorry, there's a wildfire a mile away. You don't want to be pulling that air in. The building needs to be smart to adapt to that and turn on different systems. So for us, Laura, I'd say it's definitely both and in buildings, the connective tissue is non-tangible, it's digital.
Thank you so much, Katie. We're going to jump to the electric sector, and then we're going to go back to and explore buildings and other technologies. So, Rebecca.
Yeah, good afternoon, everybody. Hello, those of you who join us virtually. So my name is Rebecca Toleen. I get to serve as the Chief Sustainability Officer, and I joke, the resident troublemaker at the Tennessee Valley Authority, which is the largest public power provider in the United States of America. So we serve about 10 million end users with energy in the region in the Southeast. And I will say we are far on our journey and have a lot of excitement in front of us. So TVA has reduced its carbon emissions by 60% from our 2005 mass emissions, which, as you know, is a pretty good pace. We have a plan to execute to 70% and are working on a pathway to 80%. We're also investing significantly in technologies to move us even forward, which will require partnerships with everybody from electric vehicles to buildings to everyone else, because making the United States goal in this space by 2030 is really around electrification. So not only are we transitioning our current generation base to reduce that carbon, we're anticipating the electrification that comes with the transition we're about to make. So I'll give an example on resiliency. We got plenty from the work we're doing with communities on new generation, but that grid modernization investment that is required to make this transition, you know, not only are we building a grid that can be more flexible, more agile, to different resources, but we're also using that opportunity to harden the grid, to be more resilient and redundant if we have climate change issues in our region. So I think all of these projects, from generation to transmission to all of the partnerships, have to look at both the carbon reduction and the ability to improve our resilience and our mitigation moving forward. So I'll pause there.
Scott, tell us a little bit about yourself and your company.
Thanks, Laura. Scott, too. I lead sustainability and the Center for Energy Efficiency for Trane Technologies, the world's leading heating, ventilation, and air conditioning company. 1 out of 2 buildings depends on Trane for some part of the comfort that's inside the building, especially large, complicated buildings like the one here in Glasgow. It's great to be here. I echo the other panelists' comments about this energy that we feel. It's not just what's outside the wall here. For viewers that can't be here, it's buzzing. It's been buzzing all week. It's buzzing for, I think, all the right reasons. I mean, we're in the America's All-In pavilion here. We know that America's back in, but here's the good news. This week, it's been an outpouring also of the business community, and truly at scale, I'm beginning to believe that we are moving towards net zero. It is a journey, which is why we've had 26 COPs. This is a journey, but there's a reason I think that the momentum is right now like I've never felt it before across all the major sectors of the economy. Built environment has been the overlooked opportunity for the world. It is inefficient. It's not well connected to the supply side grid with my friends at TVA. It's not well connected at times even to the building owners. They're not even certain at times what's going on in the buildings that they own or manage. Trane Technology is committed to decarbonizing that, but to do that, we need some other things to happen. And hopefully I get a moment in a few minutes to talk about some of the things that we think are really important that need to happen, because decarbonization, whether it's net zero or whether it's just making more progress, is a journey. The good news is we all know what needs to be done, and we also now know what to do. We don't have to wait on solutions or innovations to get us there. We can get building owners there like we're doing right now here in Scotland even. I have an example I want to talk about in a few minutes about how we're doing it. We're electrifying. We're also doing some things on the direct decarbonization side. It's also pretty exciting. So it's great to be here, great to share the stories.
Thank you. We have such a great panel. I'm taking furious notes, even though I've heard our members speak numerous times. I learned something new each time. We're here at the COP. It's buzzing. You're right. We hear it outside. A lot of positive momentum is coming from the business community. Hopefully, equally positive momentum from the national governments. But let's talk about where the rubber hits the road, where the investments go. I want to explore a little bit more about the opportunities perhaps policymakers have when guiding these investment dollars into infrastructure. And that can be in the energy sector, can be in the built environment. I think each of our panelists might have something to say about that. So Scott, maybe I can start with you.
Sure. Yeah, well, I just hinted on one. I mean, we have to electrify heating. The days of burning fossil fuels to heat buildings is behind us, just like I believe the horse buggy times are. We need to stop burning fossil fuels to heat buildings. We have technologies. We have them in place currently. We're selling them every day in Scotland and throughout Europe, throughout North America. We can electrify heating, and that is something. It's essential if we plan to decarbonize the built environment. We will not decarbonize cities without decarbonizing the built environment. 40% of the electricity of a city, of a building, is with its comfort system. Much of that is for heating. And on days like this one, maybe we don't need as much here in Glasgow, but I know that there's a lot of heating here, and much of it is burning fossil fuels. And we have to move away from that. And so we need some policies, we need some demonstration projects, we need some partnerships to demonstrate the effectiveness of what's available today. But we also need all the other things that drive electrification of heating, just like we need government to step up to help us make a step change time. There are new possibilities in the marketplace. And electrification of heating should not be something that is there's a lot of myths around it. around the technologies, like it doesn't work in cold climates, that it's not effective or available everywhere. All those things are myths that we need to be working on to dispel. And electrification of heating, I would say, is number one right now in terms of what we need governments to start doing around decarbonizing the built environment. I can give others, but I'll stop there.
Great. So, I was saying before this event that I've chaired a lot of Zoom meetings over the past year, as we all have, where it's heavily scripted and we go to box number A, then box number B. But really, I want to see if we can open it up and you can dive in on this broader topic. So I think public-private partnerships, those are my three buckets that I'd like to talk about. But so investment, I'm going to go to the investor right here, Bob.
Just do it. There you go. And luckily, no one will be on mute for any of this, right?
Oh, yeah.
Zoom. Hello? Well, maybe I was on mute. Okay, so the investment side, I guess, from our perspective, we've made a choice to only invest in projects that are climate positive. So that's looking at Scope 1, Scope 2 emissions for customers. So we're not going to make an investment if it doesn't have a net reduction there. So that's one of the changes about how we're looking at investments and making decisions. And as part of that, for each investment that we do, we're calculating what's called a carbon count. It's something that Hannon Armstrong created. It's a pretty simple, but I think pretty insightful metric where it looks at the annual CO2 reductions that are generated by an investment, and then it looks at the amount of investment that's put forward. So it comes up with a ratio on annual CO2 per $1,000 of investment. And we do that for each project that we do up front before we do a deal. And it strays into policy, I think, but it's pretty insightful if you look at a mapping. We did this for a 2020 impact report where we did that calculation for all of our projects. And the biggest circles where you're seeing the most reduction in carbon are in the places where, as you'd expect, the grid is less clean, and they're smaller in areas where it's cleaner. But that also happens to coincide with where the biggest opportunities are often in the areas with the lowest energy costs. And so when you're thinking about it from an energy efficiency investment or financing perspective, those are the areas that it's toughest to get projects done. So if we're serious about decarbonization, we have to think about pricing, looking at where the opportunities are, and putting all that together.
I'd like to talk about do you want to do the partnerships piece? Oh. Can I jump in on the investments piece? Yeah. So I just wanted to share a little bit of a story, and Bob is just an incredible, not only expert in the field, but a partner with Johnson Controls for sure. And I'll bet you could echo or share stories like this. What we're finding as we're talking to our customers who are some of the most committed to carbon reduction and decarbonization, those that have taken on big goals. So in public, you have the big conversation about how we're going to slash those carbon emissions. When you're around the table, a little bit more in private, the conversation goes a little bit more like this. Wow, that trajectory from where we are to something close to net zero is really steep, and we're really not sure how to get there. And then a second variation on that is we've made the commitment and we are committed, but truth be told, we either do not have ring-fenced capital inside the company to go get it, or maybe we do, but our company is still in the investment hurdle rates that have always governed the expenditure of our capital, and we're afraid that decarbonization might not make the return on investment cut that we need. And so there is a, geez, what are we going to do? And honestly, where that conversation has evolved is in a way that is about, one, be not afraid and be not alone. And what I mean by that is, as we look at the opportunity dramatically to dial up efficiency and dial down carbon, those are investments on the front end that cash flow. Right, so we can probably get you, at Johnson Controls, we can probably get most buildings 40% cut in energy consumption, and all of those projects cash flow. Now, what does that mean? It means when somebody doesn't know how to get there, we step up in partnership and not just sell a widget. Here's the most efficient chiller in the world. But align with them over the long haul, harness the savings from those upfront investments, plow those into renewables, microgrids, the other pieces of the equation. But two things are true, and this is the be not afraid and be not alone. You know, the days of just selling somebody a widget when we're talking about deep decarbonization and saying, call us if it breaks, that's not going to work. You have to step up in partnership, and what we're finding is we're now offering decarbonization and net zero as a service by bringing that upfront financing, so there's no upfront capital cost. We don't get paid unless we've achieved the emission reductions, and we get paid out of the savings on the back end. And then further, when you got to justify it to your board of directors, we've absorbed the risk and guarantee you will meet your decarbonization goal. Those things are financeable now, Laura. That can get done. And so as various players out there look at a big decarb goal, that they don't let themselves be stopped by a fear that they won't have the upfront capital, or there won't be somebody sharing the risk with them as they take that journey down to net zero, because players are there to step up in that kind of partnership.
But it's not totally linear. That journey to net zero is not totally linear anyway. That stepping down, as Katie mentioned, which I agree with, it is a step down, but it's not always equal from month to month, year to year. COVID gave us a great learning example. We had building owners who wanted to bring their people back, who had committed to things like emissions reductions and energy reductions, and then there were questions about safety of the indoor air quality, and the questions were about, is the air that our employees will breathe safe, and will it impact our efficiency if we add a lot of filters and other equipment? And the answer did not necessarily have to be yes, there was always an and. We worked very closely with them to connect all those dots. You know, it goes back to sensors and connected devices and using intelligence and data analytics, as well as the things that we know how to do really well, like mechanical systems, and then new technologies to ensure that the air was clean and healthy. And we connected all those dots so they can still stay on the journey that Katie mentioned, this step down to net zero, even in a time of a pandemic where there was concerns about health.
Yeah, I'll jump in on infrastructure real quick, just because sitting between these two, I realize electrification is key, right, to what you guys are doing. And so making sure that we get on the ground what we can to support our customers who are demanding cleaner energy is really an important piece of this, and partnership with entities who are working with buildings and other sectors to make sure we're incorporating that in. I'll say, you know, we've got 10,000 megawatts of renewables coming in the next few years. The other key to all of this is reliability, which is, I would not be a utility person if I didn't mention reliability today. But it is key to all sectors having the confidence to invest in what you guys just talked about, right? And so if you have issues with reliability, you will set back the carbon policy of the country and the world quite substantially. And so we're very focused on making sure we're building that reliability into our plans, and some of that new technology. So, you know, we just saw the bipartisan infrastructure bill pass. We're very excited about that. That investment in grid modernization, technologies like carbon capture, hydrogen. TVA is very excited. We're working toward a small modular reactor as well, along with long-term storage. Those pieces of that infrastructure puzzle have to be there to be able to make these other things work. And so we're really passionate about that. And everybody likes to ask what keeps me up at night. Keeping the lights on is what keeps you up. True. And you want to make sure that happens. That's cool.
Let me build on that a bit. I realize I probably should have started the conversation with, how do you define resilience? And how does your company or entity think about resilience? You know, you talked about infrastructure. You're all facing many different climate impacts that are now documented as being attributable to the changing climate with the most recent IPCC report in the summer. So let's bring the conversation out of the net zero for a moment, and let's explore a little bit about resilience and what it means to your company. So anybody volunteers? Go ahead, Rebecca.
I can jump in on that one as well. So, you know, reliability is keeping kind of the system up. Resilience is really about your ability to withstand significant impacts or build back or reduce the likelihood of those impacts. And so you see that a lot in utilities around redundancy in our generation and our transmission systems. But you also see that for TVA with our partnerships with communities, right? And so we just had a very small rural community in Middle Tennessee got hit by significant flooding, right? And so that impacts their distribution system, our local power companies there, and our ability to get, when an incident like that happens, to get people back up on the grid as quickly as possible. For those of you who are my friends in Texas who recently had the ice storms there, you see power. I think we were saying in a panel I was in earlier today, you've got air, water, and electricity, right? And it is central to quality of life. So for us, resiliency is part of a lot of planning. We have our climate action plans, our resiliency plans that we do. It's a constant conversation for a utility to be ready for those occasions and be able to get folks back to a place where they can be, you know, have a quality of life.
Well, for us, resilience, I think, really is improving the built environment for customers. So that can be replacing older mechanical equipment that might be at or, you know, often beyond its useful life. Some of that can be climate related. Some of that can just be operational resilience from a production and, you know, economic output type perspective. So there's certainly that. You know, the work we do also strays into helping replace transformers, other elements that are more, you know, inside the fence, but still more infrastructure related. So that's how we think about resilience.
You know, one thing on top of that, I would say to Bob's point is that we have so many customers that call us asking for things like adding renewable energy to their building. They want what I call the shiny star. They want to add something new that's like, you know, and renewable, of course, is great for buildings, but first, before you add renewables, the building itself needs to be as efficient as possible. Yeah. There's sort of an order to those things, and I think of resiliency as the same way. There's a priority order for how a company makes itself resilient as well as how we help building owners make themselves resilient. And I think that's incumbent on us as providers of buildings and building owners in the built environment or the supply side to make sure that people aren't making missteps either as we move along these journeys.
Yeah, you know, what I'd add to this, and I agree with all the insights shared, is to me, resilience is about agility and strength in the face of change. And I think that there's a bunch of dimensions of change. Scott hit on a great one earlier, where we can't let it be a zero-sum game that we're going to dial the clock back on greenhouse gases and efficiency, because we have to dial the system up in terms of ventilation and fresh air. So coming back to the outset, digitalization is what enables you to break through that trade-off so that HVAC system that's now driving harder because you need more fresh air is now able to talk to the security system, to the lights, to the plug loads, so that net you are still achieving that efficiency objective even as you're upping your game in terms of clean air. And I'd add one more, because I think, you know, for us at Johnson Controls, we're trying now to be optimizing against not only energy and climate, but water as well. And to me, resilient infrastructure is infrastructure that allows us to handle a variety of stressors. One of the things that I think is most exciting, for example, about heat pumps and electrification, that's not just a climate change story. Most of our major heat pump projects are about resilience against another stressor, which is water. So in so many industrial processes, you not only are wasting a lot of energy as you are firing up boilers, but then you've created a lot of heat and you're dissipating that by evaporative destruction of water. As we switch to heat pumps Then you've got infrastructure that's resilient against a climate stressor, but you're totally backing out the need evaporatively to destroy tons of water a day in an industrial process that then dissipates heat. So I think it's that agility against various stressors and the ability to optimize in the face of those changing stressors.
Thank you. A lot of scarce resources that we have to really manage carefully, from money to water to the air that we breathe, and to make sure that they're delivered efficiently and reliably, to Rebecca's point. I think you've already hit the value of partnerships, but can you tell us a story, maybe tell us a story of one that you're particularly proud of at the city, state, national level, a project that exemplifies this value of public-private partnerships? Or is there anything left to say about partnerships?
I'll shout out one, and I think it gets to a little bit of what folks have been talking about in terms of also the greater dimension and texture of conversation we see at this COP. So this is a shout out to the government of Canada. There, see, people are applauding the government of Canada.
That's the Canada Pavilion.
And in this instance, we are partnered with the government of Canada that has an incredibly brilliant vision driving towards net zero. Interestingly, they asked us to come in, one, as I was saying before, in shared partnership about achieving that journey to net zero, but they wanted to start with their military institutions. And the reason they want to start there comes right back to not only resilience, but readiness. They know that one of the biggest stressors and causers of potential altercation in the world is that which is coming from the pressure on Mother Nature and what that means in terms of the pressure on populations and people. And so we are partnered with them now, not just to do an engineering exercise of decarbonizing their buildings and their military bases, but it actually is an end-to-end partnership to ensure the sustainability, excellence, and literacy of every military leader in Canada, so that they understand essentially that tackling climate isn't just for the environment in the abstract. It really is a national security imperative. And I love that partnership because it so does more justice to the imperative of climate action.
Yeah, I'll jump in on partnerships just real quick. It's hard to pull back and pick, but for a utility company to partner, we partner with a number of communities throughout our region. And these are communities that have come together and they're looking for broad solutions. Things like broadband, what we call connected communities, their electric vehicle charging, to help them pull together that entire package to move that with all the kind of synergy that we can. That's been really powerful. We've got Knoxville, Nashville. Some of these communities are at the forefront of their investment in green energy, and to be able to work with a community on that while bringing in other partners to talk to them about their buildings or other places where that community could really have an impact. And so I think one of the things about COP26 is we've seen a lot of focus on solutions, right? And so one of the things as a utility company I've found is that we're kind of at the table in places to bring a number of different solutions into a community who's hungry to move forward. And we want them to do it in the right order, right? I mean, you want them to make sure they're thinking things through. And so, we've just had a lot of positive interaction with those communities, with our local power companies in those areas, bringing forth kind of a whole package that addresses both resiliency, their desire for green energy, and getting that implemented. And so we hope to see that continue and bring more partners to those tables.
Hey, Laura, one thing I would say about partnerships that we've learned is that sometimes it's the outcomes that you begin with are not the ones you thought about in the beginning. We have an example here in Scotland of a wastewater treatment facility that has had waste heat because of their wastewater processes it's been wasted for many, many years. because no one regulates wasted heat. Every building has wasted heat. It just leaves. Just like we don't regulate emissions, we're not regulating things like wasted heat, but you can reuse the heat. You can capture, recover the heat, and if you have a heat pump system, you can direct it into that system, and it can provide the free heating for the building. That one facility here in Scotland saving 400 metric tons of CO2 a year just from recovering the heat that's always been wasted for years and years and years. That's one very small example and an outcome that wasn't expected in the beginning. It's just one. The other is another great partnership is what we're doing with the Department of Energy. U.S. Department of Energy just this week announced a new program around cold climate heat pumps to help us dispel the myth that you can't use heat pumps in very cold climates. We know it's a myth. The public is under some old understanding that they don't work very well in cold climates. So it's good that the U.S. Department of Energy is going to have a good study where they prove out that it does in fact work in those climates. So we'll answer all of the questions that are still outstanding. So two different types of partnerships, both with different outcomes, but we need lots of those type partnerships to move this needle.
Yeah, I like the unintended positive benefits and outcomes of that example. In the next segment, let's talk about policy. So this is the sweet spot for the Business Council for Sustainable Energy, which advocates for policies at the federal level. We bring a delegation every year to the climate conference. We've done that since our inception in 1992. And we work with our partners at the state level when the opportunity arises. So I'm gonna just read my questions, and you can pick whether or not you want to throw in for both of them or one of them. It's not a mysterious door that's choose behind, but it'll be very clear to you, the questions. The first is, what are your policy priorities at home? There's a lot in the mix right now when it comes to advancing the clean energy transition or climate action. And then the second question would be, why does the international process here at COP26, where we're working together and we're pushing countries to ratchet up their climate ambition, why does that matter to your company and how you do business? So I don't have a preset order. So let's explore the U.S. policy first. I'm going to go back to Rebecca.
Yeah, so I think for TVA, we're very focused on what's after that 80% reduction. And so we are seeking policies and decisions that really invest in those technologies to drive us past that 80% carbon reduction in our grid. So we're very excited about, like I said, the infrastructure bill, our partnership with DOE and others, in making sure that we know what comes after 2030, what comes after 2035, and how do we make sure we're maintaining reliability and affordability, but really driving that carbon further. And so we're working with partners at all levels to try to make sure that that happens. I'll just say on the international scale, one of the things that I have found very valuable here again is the focus on solutions, but because you set goals and targets, businesses, governments all start moving the same way, and then we can learn from each other. And that's especially true for the utility industry, which is really great at learning from each other in all sorts of different facets. But that's one of the things I've really enjoyed here this week, and I look forward to more in the future.
Sure. Maybe I'll touch on both. I guess first, thinking of domestic policy, obviously there's a large amount of funding that would be in the reconciliation bill. I think over $500 billion for climate. That's great. There's a lot of positive things in there. But maybe two comments on that. One, it's a reconciliation bill, which is a pretty blunt, more budgetary than policy instrument. So there's only so much that can be done, and there's a lot more that needs to be done. But it obviously is something that we need to have happen and would be a very positive event. But there's a lot more work to get done. And some of that maybe is just on the focus on the numbers. With the reconciliation bill, there's been so much talk about the top line numbers, $3 trillion, $2 trillion, what's it going to be? And if you look at 2030 and what Bloomberg New Energy Finance says is needed in order to hit the targets that would be needed to keep us on track for the Paris Agreement, it's $92 trillion of investment. So the best thing that policy can do is engage and mobilize the private sector and private investment. And that's where a lot of the domestic focus needs to be. So this is a good start, but
the question should be asked about how are you going to engage the private sector with it. And some of the cuts that happened to the reconciliation bill, the Open Back Better program had a 4-to-1 leveraging requirement for the states in it. That was dropped. And you know, that's a shame. Hopefully the states can pick that back up. And then I guess to the broader, more global, and you know why COP is important here, I think Paris set the pace under science-based targets for companies to move to action. And this is certainly about policy here, but it's also about the business community and the investment community. So for us to participate here is really to engage with the partners that we want to do work on, and that's why we're here.
Well, I believe that I certainly agree with Bob that the private sector has a huge role in solving the problem, but I think that governments also should lead by example. And I also think that governments are the key to consumer behavior. And so I think we need governments to begin doing the hard work of decarbonizing the built environment. They should send the signals to consumers via incentives, via all the things that we need for consumers to actually take new actions. Whether we're talking about commercial building owners or we're talking about residential homeowners, we need government also to lead by example. So it's a two-edged sword, I think, and we need both sides.
Katie.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So I guess I do want to just reflect a little philosophically for half a second on why COP is so important. And really what comes to mind when you ask the question was, I don't know if any of you remember the economist Herman Daly, who was at the World Bank a long time ago, in the early part of that 3-decade trajectory. And he had an insight which was, and I think it is absolutely true, that the economy is a wholly owned subsidiary of the environment. And you know, all of the stuff we're building and growing and trying to come to life depends on a vital, healthy environment. And so the progress here is also vital to that. But I do also have some policy priorities that and favorites that I'd like to put up there. With BCSE, you guys are such a force for change and have really made such amazingly impactful policies come to life. And so the work that you have done and continue to do in the standard setting process, absolutely critical. Keep raising the bar in terms of efficiency, in terms of codes and model codes, and making sure we're having a stretch in terms of the technologies are available today. Let's have the codes catch up. So I want to really celebrate the work that you all have done. That remains foundational. So I get the luxury of adding, because I know you guys are going to continue to drive that forward. The two that I'd like to call out that I think are absolutely vital and just so exciting in terms of force multipliers on action. One builds on what Bob said, and I would just say the engagement of investors, investment advisors, and I'll tell you what, talk about we mean business, they mean business. The fact that climate now is the issue that is causing directors losses of proxy battles, the fact that now we have, and the UK is to certainly be recognized in terms of leadership and mandatory disclosure of climate risks, and the now hopefully coming similar action by the SEC in the United States. You know, as Scott can certainly say, you know, for train, Johnson Controls, for a big part of who and what we are as companies, we've spent our time in the basement, you know, of the building with the operating systems. If you want a nonstop elevator from the basement to the boardroom, you have it be something that the SEC is going to be examining. And so I think it's an incredible force multiplier. And the other I would toss in is we're at the early stages of a very powerful new policy tool that mimics renewable portfolio standards. And they're called building portfolio standards. And basically, as utilities have led the way every year, every 5 years, X% increase in renewables on the grid, a building performance standard is every X years a certain percentage less carbon per square foot can be in that building. One, hard to decarbonize, building sector, pushing it to the fore, making it mandatory. But the second thing that's so powerful about that is it finally targets exactly existing buildings and not just standards for new buildings. Important because 70% of them that we got today, only 3% of which are green, will still be here in 2050. So building performance standards and the action of the investment community, including central banks and financial regulators, I think could be force multipliers.
Fantastic. Thank you for, Katie, you're a great visual speaker. I have a lot of movement in my mind now from the basement to above, and the force multipliers coming at us from all sides, and that's exactly what we need to solve this crisis. So we have people in the room. We can take live questions. You can pretend to type them into your phone if you like, if that makes you feel more comfortable. But do we have any questions? We have BCSE members in the house that could ask some questions. No?
People might be saying, is it cold beer time?
Here.
I'm Jim Wolf, and I'm a member of the Business Council and also a consultant to Train Technologies. And I just want to make homeowners, or to encourage homeowners to do the right thing, to have a resilient building. I think we have a serious problem. And I want to give you a quick example. A homeowner typically goes after the low-hanging fruit. We'll change the light bulbs. We'll put in better windows. And then their air conditioner fails. And the contractor doesn't come in and do an energy analysis and decide that that building now needs a 3.5-ton system for air conditioning instead of a 4. So what happens, they put in a like system, a 4-ton, because the homeowner said, oh, I don't want it lower, I want enough capacity. So what happens? They set the thermostat lower to be comfortable because that bigger unit is not going to take the humidity out. What we need, we have a requirement in both places where you have to get a building permit to put in an air conditioner. Some places you don't. What we need is that you have to provide an energy analysis when you make a change in your HVAC system, that it's sized properly to give the performance at the lowest comfort, the best comfort at the lowest energy consumption. What can we do in the industry or government to bring about those type changes that will mean that we really get a resilient house when it's retrofitted?
Jim, I think you have a great idea. Let's just drive that right into policy. And I do think that information and clarity of information is key, and that people with the right information and with some choices, Rebecca, you may have a perspective on this, but I've always thought that one, if people understood that kind of data, that kind of information, and could couple it with things like optionality around when they're using electricity and what the price point of electricity is and what the carbon intensity of the electricity is at any given time. So time of use rates and visibility towards, again, how much renewables is on the grid. Do I dry my laundry now? Do I wait till later? I don't know if I have the luxury of saying to Rebecca, I'd love to hear your perspective.
Well, Rebecca, I wanted Rebecca and Bob both to say something, because I believe, to Jim's point, that there may be some stakeholders who have solutions that are not in the mix right now. Maybe we need a new financing model where we're financing comfort as a service for homeowners, and the system itself is financed very differently. Homeowners love leasing cars, and they want a new one every few years because they want the latest technologies. Or maybe it's the supply side that's the answer. There's a lot of upside for the supply side to have more intelligence and more chips in the game for the amount of energy that homes use.
Yeah, so I think, we've had programs that do these sorts of things. I'll mention two things to follow up on Katie's point. I think consumers need more information and more clean information on what's going on in their homes and with the products they're buying. So I would challenge a lot of my business partners to think about that and make sure that's clear. On the part of the utility, we also would love to send price signals and timing signals, and so folks can, and we're doing a lot of the work around that. I will say I serve an area of the country of the United States that is one of the poorer regions of the United States, and every year I sit in a bill payment collection office for a day to make sure I remember and understand the struggle that some of our homeowners in the valley have as far as paying their electric bill. So I think we have to find solutions, and this goes back to the policy discussion we were talking about, policy decisions and initiatives that don't leave people behind. Because what I have seen happen in the past is some of these programs are taken advantage of by those who have the dollars to do that, have the income to do that, and some of the communities are underserved and left behind. So it's a real policy challenge, I think, for all of us to make sure that we're thinking that through, right? And making sure the policies bring those folks, have those abilities to make those decisions as well.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for your time, your energy here at the COP. Josh Jacobs with WAP Sustainability. Very proud to represent U.S. Green Building Council here at COP26. So I heard a lot of talk about investing in Scope 1 and 2 information. I heard about saving Scope 1 and 2 emissions. All wonderful. As we invest in mitigation and resilience, though, I would like to understand any of your organizations looking at Scope 3, which we're finding in our supply chains, this embodied carbon is half, if not more, of the problem as we save operational and Scope 1 and 2 carbon. Thank you.
Yeah. Can I jump in? Yeah, so absolutely, and I think that Johnson Controls' footprint is probably very, very representative of a lot of companies in a lot of different sectors, in that our Scope 3 emissions are larger by far than our Scopes 1 and 2. So absolutely brilliant to have your eye on that ball. I'd say a couple things. First, in terms of what we are doing, we do have science-based targets against absolute emission reductions in Scope 3 as well as Scopes 1 and 2. Second, we've dialed them back to 2025. So as we have just gone out to market with a sustainability-linked bond, we tied that to meeting absolute emission reductions across all three scopes. But here's where I think the rubber also meets the road. So for us, it's about going upstream and downstream. We are proud and thrilled. Another one of the important things here, we became a founding member of the First Movers Coalition, so that will put our innovation and purchasing power against low then to no carbon steel. But second, I do want to just say one word about our supply chain. So we have always asked our suppliers to fill out a sustainability test, if you will. But starting this year, two things are true. They're not going to be responding to our homemade sustainability report. So we're partnered, in this case, with EcoVadis. And so all of our suppliers will need to respond to and be rated and ranked by EcoVadis, number one. But number two, starting again this year, the sustainability score will be scored equally to price, delivery, quality, reliability. So if you want to be a preferred supplier to Johnson Controls, you will have to have a strong, as determined by EcoVadis, not us, sustainability score. And that's how we want to help drive it upstream and downstream to tackle that big nut.
I just want to say one thing. So here's what we've learned from our Scope 3 journey. We have the largest commitment to Scope 3 product reductions for emissions of any company. It's a gigaton by 2030. That's 2% of the annual emissions of the world. It's a big one, and that has driven innovation at a pace we've never seen before. It's engaged our employees like never before, and it's excited our customers, because we know that we can accomplish the gigaton both directly with things like transitioning to low GWP refrigerants, We also can do it indirectly by optimizing the system using all the things that we've talked about earlier, such as connected devices and, of course, the efficiency of the equipment, and also letting it talk to a grid. And so we're doing all those things, and a lot of that is part of the gigaton. But to your point, it's also about Scope 3 with our suppliers too. And along with Katie's team, we also are founding members of that same coalition. And steel is first around net zero steel, buying net zero steel, but that's not the only one. So we know that the 30% of carbon that's related to a building that's embodied even before it all reaches the building has to be tackled. And so we've stepped up to the plate on that one too.
Hi, Dan Delury with Vermont Law School. And just a quick question. We all talk about acceleration of decarbonization, but in a lot of ways that seems to now mean doing more. And what I've started to think about is, shouldn't we be looking at how to do the things we already do at a faster pace or a shorter timeline? Particularly in the area of energy efficiency that I've worked in for a long time. You know, I'm not sure that question's been asked in a while. I know there are business incentives to do things faster, but given the timeline that we're on for decarbonization, especially saying that here in Glasgow today, we really need to start asking whether there's any fat in the timeline that can be wrenched out of the system, because an early kWh saved is an early emission avoided. And so I just would be interested in any comments along those lines.
It's where we need signals, though, in the marketplace, Dan, as you know. We can't do this on our own. No one company, not even a sector. We're going to need some market-based signals that speed things up, especially if you're talking timeline. I mean, because it's the government incentives to help consumers behave differently. It's mandates at a building codes level, at an ordinance level in cities. We need all those things if we plan to see step change that's faster than typical.
Yeah, I'd just add in there that I agree. I mean, I think energy efficiency projects take a certain time to develop, and there's probably some ways you can squeeze some time out of that and get that done quicker. But a lot of it is motivating customers. There's obviously tremendous amount of interest here. I think there's a lot of what I would call top-level interest in sustainability, energy efficiency. Getting projects done at the customer level, it's still hard. It's getting easier. We do have customers that are coming to us saying, hey, we set science-based targets. We have goals that we need to hit by 2030. We want to start moving faster. But there's still a lot of friction. It's still hard. I think there need to be clear signals and motivation to get the actual end users of energy to prioritize it and realize that it needs to happen a lot quicker than they think.
Speaking of time, we have met ours for this side event, and again, I just want to give my thanks to the. Actually, before I give thanks, I'm going to give you 30 seconds for closing remarks. Does anybody have any? Just give me a wink or no. No? Okay, we're going to wrap. Thank you, everybody, for coming to our side event. This is the last public event that the Business Council is hosting here at COP26. And I believe that we may be closing out the U.S. Climate Action Center as well. And I know their team and staff has worked tirelessly to make this forum, this beautiful forum, a reality. So thank you to them, and onward.